I often get asked whether working as a doctor has been worth it and whether it's so far lived up to my expectations. A career as a doctor is made out to be a lot of things, but my perception of what a doctor is has dramatically changed from when I was a medical student all the way up until now working as a junior doctor. Granted, I've only been working full-time now for about a year and a half, but what I've learnt and experienced throughout that time I just could not have predicted. So to answer the question of whether or not it's been worth it, this is what I've learnt about being a doctor in my first year as a doctor. Maybe you're at some point along the spectrum of thinking about medicine as a career. Maybe you're a medical student or a doctor yourself, or maybe you're just interested in what it's like. Let's start at the beginning. Throughout my journey to becoming a doctor, I always wondered what it would feel like on that very first day. Equal parts excited, equal parts nervous of screwing up. And I don't think anyone is ever 100% ready to start, even the most prepared medical student, so don't listen to what anyone around says. And there definitely is that shift in expectation. No matter how small at this, early stage in your career, there is at least internally a shift in expectation of the kind of things that you need to be able to do on that very first day. But that first day in intern year came around eventually, and I remember, I was excited, obviously, nervous as I said, and I always thought, what would be the first thing that I end up prescribing as a doctor? It's probably Panadol or something like that. I can't really remember, but I was ready to go in the sense that I was kind of excited for that next journey, next thing. And there's a few initial hurdles, obviously. The EMR was one of them. Coming from a paper-based hospital system, learning a new computer system was a bit of a challenge, but after the first few weeks, you get a hang of it. And my first rotation was on the stroke team, and my team were fantastic. They were super supportive early on, which is really helpful in those first few weeks, few months. It was a relatively busy unit to begin with, but again, I didn't really have a lot to compare it to. An understanding that I developed pretty early on in the rotation was getting an appreciation for the different kinds of patients that presented to hospital. From patients who presented with TIAs or minor strokes to other patients that presented with really severe strokes that had quite damaging deficits on their quality of life, and seeing how it affected them and their recovery, as well as how it affected their family and the people around them. The activities that we often take for granted, impacts to mobility, fine motor function, speech, swallowing, it really made me gain an appreciation for the interdisciplinary nature of hospitals after a patient is admitted. Firstly, obviously, there's a huge focus on the initial medical management. Patients are initially presented in the emergency department where a stroke doctor will evaluate them, assessing for their symptoms. They're then immediately taken to the CT scanner to assess whether they have a bleed in their brain or whether there's a visible reduction in blood flow to a particular area of their brain. However, in the days after this, so much effort is dedicated towards trying to ensure that the patient gets back to their initial pre-stroke level of function. So speech pathologists are working with patients who have difficulties swallowing or communicating from their stroke. Dietitians, again, are working with patients that have swallowing difficulties or altered diets, or if they have a nasogastric tube inserted, they make sure that they have the appropriate nutritional intake every day. Physios are trying to build mobility and strength, and again, occupational therapists are trying to work with the patient and ensuring that they're either safe to go home or move on to rehab, which is a common next step for a lot of patients that experience a severe stroke. So I've probably spoken a lot about this initial part, but I thought it would be a good place to start and kind of get a bit of an understanding of all the different parts that go into really good patient care. Yes, the beginning is a bit scary, but it gets better every day with the more you learn, and I think every intern that starts is in the same position as you, so how you're feeling is expected and it's okay. But in saying that, probably some of the biggest learnings that you have as a junior doctor come from mistakes. And they're inevitable, unfortunately, particularly when you're junior. And you try your best, of course, to avoid mistakes, but small things here and there come up and you learn from them. Then there'll be bigger mistakes that come along, things that may actually in some way or another affect patient care. But the important thing is that you recognize when they have happened, especially when you're early on. People are pretty understanding of the small little mistakes that you make as an intern. And of course, in saying that, the thing that's going to help you get through these tough days, get through the mistakes, get through the self-doubt is understanding, who you are as a person outside of the hospital. Particularly early on, lower your expectations. You're a junior doctor, and at the end of the day, you're there to learn, you're there to grow. Yes, you have small responsibilities, but in the scheme of things, you're there to kind of develop your skill set as a clinician and become a good and a safe junior doctor. And you do that by learning on the go. That's how it works. And don't mistake that for thinking that you have to have all of the answers. And you're a doctor, sure, but this doesn't define your whole identity. I often find myself conflating these two things, and it only serves to restrict me in other areas of my life. As much as I enjoy being a doctor, I know that I'm much more than just the title. I'm definitely someone that probably wears their heart on their sleeve a little bit too much, and sometimes I take things home when I probably don't need to, but At the same time, making sure that I have other things going on for myself outside of the hospital makes life more fulfilling, and it allows me to remember the other things that make up my identity. But at the end of the day, look, it's definitely easier said than done. And I spend a lot of time in the day, and I say I here because I'm speaking for myself, but I'm probably speaking for a lot of other doctors, a lot of other people that work in the hospital system. But you spend a lot of time in the day thinking about other people, thinking about your patients, thinking about your colleagues, your seniors, ensuring that you're doing a good job for all of those people, and you don't spend a lot of time thinking about yourself necessarily. And the expectation is that you come home and that once you open the door and finish your day at work, that you're then going to start thinking about yourself. But it's not always the case, because we come home and there's dishes, got to cook food, got to do all the things to maintain life. But sometimes you don't preserve enough time for yourself. You have to really ruthlessly prioritize certain things in your life, because it doesn't just happen naturally. At least it doesn't for me anyway. This could be the basic things like cooking a meal, cooking dinner, preparing food for the next day, exercising, keeping the house clean. And then there are things that you really have to prioritize for yourself, like seeing friends. And for me, playing a game of tennis, making these YouTube videos, and doing things that, make my life fulfilling outside of the hospital. When you're in med school, people often tell you, when you're a doctor, you've got to look after yourself, maintain balance, because it can be hectic and all those things. The idea of balance maybe in our head makes us feel a little bit better, but I don't think it's ever possible to have everything in perfect equilibrium. It's super, super easy not to look after yourself, but really, really try and make this a priority early on as a doctor. And this feels like a bit of a natural transition to thinking about what it's like being a healthcare worker in general. And I'm still working it out. I'm in the early days of working it out what it's like to actually be a healthcare worker. But we are a breed that tends to take things home with us. We tend to see some pretty crazy and awful things during the day, and it is hard to shake that off, and probably not natural to necessarily shake it off and just come home and be okay. But that is something to expect, and I guess to understand that that will be the case. But behind every pair of scrubs, there's a person just trying their best, trying to do the best for themselves and for their patients. Inevitably, your colleagues are going to go through stuff as well, and so it's important to check in and to see how they're going, not just after, when something challenging or tricky comes up in the hospital, but just on a regular basis. And the best conversations that I've had at work have had absolutely nothing to do with work at all. For doctors, for healthcare workers, for medical students, mental health is a real thing, so we all just have to try and do our part to look out for each other and help out our mates where we can. There have actually been a load of really tangible skills that I've learned as a doctor so far, and I think being a junior and experiencing different varied environments really helps to build that. In the past year, I've worked on the stroke team, as I said. I've worked in the emergency department, in general medicine, in surgery, and in psychiatry, and I think that all of those experiences offer different things to build your skill set as a junior doctor. I feel that over this time, I've really built on kind of the bread and butter things that you learn in medical school, and I've also kind of built on the skill set of how to initially treat patients and manage them, ensure that they're safe, and then also navigating the complex hospital system and learning how the system works, which is a wild and crazy beast which you can only really start to comprehend when you begin working there full time. As doctors, I think that we acquire a pretty specific skill set over time, but I think there's also a lot of things that we probably don't give ourselves enough credit for. The craziness of working in a hospital has definitely made me probably more organized, develop more efficient habits, and has taught me how to prioritize both in the hospital with clinical work, but also in life outside of the hospital. Have all of these experiences made the time dedicated to becoming a doctor worthwhile? And the answer definitely is yes. 100%. When I reflect, I can't imagine any other experience that would have enabled me to learn so much in such a short period of time. And it's a pretty privileged spot to be in, and I feel pretty grateful that I've been able to experience all of these different things. It's also taught me a lot about what being a doctor is, and also, I guess, what it can look like, which I'd love to explore in future videos as well. Look, there are definitely times when it's not so easy, where you feel uncomfortable, out of your depth even. but it also comes with some amazing moments and some great opportunities to learn some pretty cool things. I hope to hear your thoughts as well if you're in a similar position to me, or you're a medical student and you're kind of been thinking about what it's like to be a doctor, or just if you have any questions in general, drop them in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, liking and subscribing really helps me to grow this channel, and I really appreciate it. But until next time, see you soon.